Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we are tackling what is arguably one of the most massive, urgent challenges of our entire lifetime, and that is decarbonizing heavy industry. We are looking at a structural solution that's going to require an estimated $30 trillion by 2050 to transition our industrial sectors to net zero. I know $30 trillion is a staggering number, but as we're going to see today, the solution here isn't just about inventing some new magical technology. It's actually about a fundamentally new way of organizing and financing the technology we already have.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our blueprint for understanding the future of industrial energy today. We'll start with the heavy industry problem, look at the clean investment gap, introduce the industrial cluster, break down 4 key drivers of success, and finally, look at 3 blueprints for financing.
So, part 1, the heavy industry problem. Why the very backbone of our growth is kind of holding us back.
Now, you might be wondering, as of mid-2025, we've got roughly 140 countries representing over 90% of global GDP that have announced or are considering net zero targets. So with all that momentum, why are global emissions still so dangerously off track? Well, the answer is right there in those massive smokestacks. We're talking about the hard-to-abate sectors. Think steel, cement, aluminum, chemicals, shipping, aviation. These industries are literally the undeniable backbone of global economic growth, of jobs, and of trade. But, and it's a huge but, they also account for roughly 40% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. They are our biggest emissions hurdle for sure. We absolutely cannot reach our climate goals without them. But actually transitioning these massive industrial giants, it's incredibly complex. We're facing some severe roadblocks here. For starters, a lot of the clean technologies are still maturing. They just haven't reached scalable availability yet. Then you've got the massive upfront capital costs for retrofitting these plants, alongside some really severe end-to-end supply chain constraints. And if that wasn't enough, lengthy permitting processes and inconsistent policy support can completely stall progress. Addressing these barriers isn't just a nice-to-have environmental goal anymore. It is a global competitiveness imperative. If we don't solve these issues, these industries simply won't transition.
Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds, the clean investment gap. This is where ambition meets financial reality.
When we look at the financial reality of those barriers we just talked about, we see a pretty staggering disconnect. Take a look at this massive number, $2 trillion. That is the estimated 2024 global investment in clean energy. We are seeing an absolute boom in clean energy investment right now, which is fantastic. But it's being driven almost entirely by renewable power, like solar and wind.
Now I want you to contrast that $2 trillion with this shockingly small figure, $32 billion. It's almost hard to wrap your head around, right? Aside from a brief spike in 2023, this $32 billion represents the average annual investment since 2020 in the broader clean industry economy. So we're talking things like clean hydrogen, carbon capture, and green steel. Now what's really interesting about this slide is when you put it all together. Out of a total $3.1 trillion of energy investment, $2 trillion goes to clean energy, but a barely visible sliver goes to industry end use. It's a bit absurd when you map it out like this. We clearly have the global ambition, and the capital exists to fund clean energy, so why are these vital industrial projects starved of the funding they so desperately need?
The short answer? Risk. According to data from the Mission Possible Partnership, out of a global pipeline of roughly 700 net zero-aligned industrial facilities, only 1/5, just 20%, are actually financed. The remaining 80%, they are completely stuck. This proves that standalone, single-facility industrial projects are simply too risky, too expensive, and quite frankly, too isolated for lenders to comfortably back them. We need a totally new delivery model.
Which brings us to part 3. Enter the industrial cluster, a structural ecosystem solution.
This is the exact delivery model required to fix that fragmented pipeline and turn it into something investable and scalable. So let's define what we mean here. Industrial clusters are geographic areas where co-located companies across multiple sectors, along with public institutions, collaborate around shared infrastructure and low-carbon projects. Don't just think of this as a designated zone on a map. Think of it as a living ecosystem. In this ecosystem, shared arteries like hydrogen pipelines and unified power grids connect the early innovators with anchor off-takers, creating this amazing network of mutual reliance and support.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the heavy-hitting financial institutions view this shift. Carlos Torres Vila, the chair of BBVA, notes that unlocking this potential depends entirely on making projects bankable through strong governance and shared risk. The big financial players recognize that clusters are the definitive key to unlocking massive capital. They want to invest in ecosystems, not isolated islands.
Let's walk through exactly why this works. Co-locating companies naturally de-risks investments across the board. On the market and policy side, clusters naturally garner much stronger institutional support from governments. Technically speaking, they allow companies to share really expensive infrastructure and centralized project coordination. For market realization, clustering aggregates both supply and demand. That guarantees buyers for new clean energy products, which drastically decreases costs. And finally, just being in close physical proximity promotes rapid innovation and knowledge sharing. Ideas spread like wildfire.
To ground this theory in physical reality for a second, think about massive, dedicated pipelines for transporting captured carbon or green hydrogen. When multiple heavy industrial users share multi-user access to transport and storage networks like these, it reduces duplication. Everyone isn't building their own pipeline. This creates profound economies of scale that a single project developer simply couldn't ever achieve on their own.
Moving on to part 4, 4 drivers of success. Let's look at how we actually make the cluster bankable. So how do we practically ensure these complex cluster projects clear their investment hurdles and actually get built? Well, there's a really logical progression here. Step 1 is absolutely vital. Establish a cluster administrator. Fragmented ownership breeds immense complexity, so you need a centralized, trusted entity to coordinate all the permitting and financing. Step 2 is to pool resources to optimize upfront costs for that shared infrastructure. Step 3 is securing strong offtake agreements. These are the durable contracts between suppliers and buyers that guarantee revenue certainty for the lenders. And Step 4 is deploying phase-appropriate public capital, where governments sequence their tools, like financial guarantees, to de-risk the very earliest stages of development. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, 3 Blueprints for Financing. These are tailored investment models.
Now, while those 4 drivers we just talked about apply universally, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to funding. The balance shifts dynamically based on local regulations. In a government-enabled blueprint, you have advanced and clear regulations, meaning the certainty itself unlocks private capital, so the government mostly just facilitates. But in a public capital-led environment where certainty is only moderate, public authorities actually have to step in and act as anchor investors to seed the projects. Finally, in a single developer-led archetype where there are very limited government incentives, massive private developers have to take on the early-stage risk themselves, driven purely by their own sponsor capital and future market demand.
So, the crucial point to remember is this. While the cluster ecosystem provides a massive halo effect, meaning it makes everything more attractive to investors by reducing overall systemic risk, it's not a free pass. You rarely see blanket financing for a whole cluster. Each individual project within that ecosystem still has to be financially viable on its own merits and clear its own independent due diligence hurdles to survive.
But honestly, when we get this right, the upside is literally world-changing. Just look at the real-world potential based on data from the World Economic Forum's Transitioning Industrial Clusters initiative. Across 40 active clusters, we are looking at 877 million tons of CO2 abatement, a staggering $508 billion contribution to global GDP, and 4.6 million jobs either protected or created. That's what happens when bankability translates into real-world prosperity. Which leaves us with this final, massive thought. We clearly have the global ambition to reach net zero. We have the technological necessity. And, as we've explored today, we now have the structural blueprints to make industrial clusters highly investable. The capital is out there. The only question that remains is, will we bridge the industrial financing gap in time to transform the heavy industry backbone of our world? It is a colossal challenge, but the roadmap is clearer than ever. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to dive deeper into how these industrial ecosystems are being built right now.